Hi, I'm Chris. I'm an editor and a DaVinci Resolve Master Trainer. Today, I'm going to look at some of the editing functionality that you can access in DaVinci Resolve. We've been sent some footage to put together a short trailer for a documentary film by the filmmaker Brian Terwilliger. And so to do that, we're going to start by creating a new project. So here I am in the project manager. I'll just click on the new project button to create that and give this project a name. Age of Airplanes Trailer. Choose to create. And DaVinci Resolve opens directly in the cut page. Now the best place for me to do importing and organization is actually in the media page. So down in the bottom of the interface here, just click on the media page. Now on the top left of the media page, it gives me access to all of my system storage locations. So I'm just going to right click here in the side and choose Add New Location. I'm going to navigate to the location where my footage is. In this case, it's actually in my Documents folder. Go to the Editing folder and then choose Open. And that creates a new storage location for me to access here. Now the video and the audio clips that have been sent to me are actually in separate folders. And to a certain extent, I want to preserve that folder structure. So when I import the footage into Resolve, I actually want to import and also to create a series of bins. Simply select these two folders in the media storage location, right click and then choose the third option, which in this case is Add Folder and Subfolders into Media Pool, creating bins. Now at this point, DaVinci Resolve is asking me to change the project frame rate. This is so that the project frame rate will match the frame rate of the footage that I'm bringing in. So in this case, I need to accept the change. So now the footage has been imported into the media pool, it's ready for me to start working on and organizing. The first thing I'm going to do is just access the audio clips bin. And you can see that although I've got a folder of sound effects that actually contains a series of sound effects that I'm going to use within the trailer, the other clips aren't organized into bins. So let's create a couple of other bins so that we know where this footage is. So first of all, with the audio clips bin selected, I'm going to come to the File menu and choose the option here, New Bin. There are also a series of shortcuts that you can employ here as well, such as Shift and Command N, because I'm on a Mac. That then creates the new bin, and I'm just going to call this Music. And then take the clip Music for Trailer and just drag and drop that into the Music folder. So organizing clips into bins is very similar to organizing files in folders on your operating system. I've also got two voiceover clips here. I'm just going to select both of those and this time right click and choose Create Bin with Selected Clips. I'm going to call this VO. So that's got all of my audio clips organized into separate bins. I now need to do the same with the video clips. But in this case, rather than just using simple bins, I'm going to use a series of smart bins. So selecting the video clips folder, you can see I've got a series of thumbnails for each of the clips. If I actually just take my mouse and run the mouse across the clips, you can see that each of the video clips is previewed for me. If I get to a clip that actually has audio, you can also hear that I've also got audio scrubbing as well. I'm just going to turn that off for the moment, just by pressing Shift S on my computer. Now we're not hearing the audio scrub. Obviously, these three clips that I have here are interview clips. So I'm actually going to tag them with a keyword called interview. I'm going to shift click to select all of those three clips. And then in the metadata panel, down in the bottom right-hand corner of the interface, I'm just going to display the keyword metadata field that I need. Clicking in the sort menu for the metadata panel, I'm just going to choose the option Shot and Scene. And this will actually show the metadata for the shot and the scene information for these clips. You can see scrolling down through this view here that we actually have a field for keywords. So I'm going to enter the keyword interview. Just type in interview or beginning to type interview in the metadata field means that it'll actually bring up a list of options for different keywords. But you can always put in your own keywords in there. Let's choose the option for interview and choose save. So that's how easy it is in order to be able to add keywords to any clip within your project. Now that we've added the keywords to the clip, it's actually really easy because DaVinci Resolve will automatically display any keyworded clips in their own smart bin. Down in the bottom left-hand corner of your bin list, simply select the keywords option and then toggle it open using the disclosure arrow. And you'll see in there is a smart bin for interview. So my 3 interview clips are now being displayed within that smart bin. Just to show you how easy it is to keep adding keywords, I'm just going to select the video clips bin and select the clip called credits. In the keywords, I'm going to add the keyword credits. And now that has actually tagged that clip with that keyword. You'll see that I have a credits smart bin available to me. So now you can carry on adding whatever keywords you want to any of the clips within your project and organize them. However, there's much more to the metadata than this. If we select the video clips bin, for example, and then select this first clip here for the aerial shot for this Kenya clip. If I come up here and select the inspector in the top right-hand corner and then choose the File tab in the inspector, you can see that we've actually got a series of metadata fields that we can easily access. These are the same metadata fields that you'll be able to see in the actual metadata panel itself. It just means that they're easier to access here inside the inspector. Now, I can actually populate this with a series of metadata just by simply clicking in these fields and start to type in the information. However, if you've got somebody on the production team that might be logging these shots, it's actually easier to import the metadata rather than to add every single piece of metadata individually. So let's go to the File menu and we'll choose Import Metadata to Media Pool. Navigate to where your editing footage is on your system and choose to select the AOA login.csv file. A CSV file is a comma-separated values file. It's very simple to create in any spreadsheet application. I'm going to choose to open that. And you'll see that when I'm importing this login information, you can see that it is also asking me for a series of things that it's trying to match to. Now, in this information, we don't actually have timecode information for these clips. So in this case, I'm just going to uncheck match using clip start and end timecode. I'm going to uncheck that option and then choose OK. And you'll see that the information has actually been imported and now 27 media pool clips have been updated. If I select any of these clips again, you'll now see in the File tab in the inspector, I've now got additional information in terms of the scene number, also a shot number, and quite often, sometimes whether this is a good shot or a good take or not. Just scrolling down to the bottom of the file inspector, you can also see a comments field has also been added. So having added all of that metadata to these clips, how can I actually use it? Well, I can actually use it in order to be able to do very quick searches across the project. If I select the master bin, for example, and let's say I wanted to do a search across this information for any shots that were shot at San Francisco Airport, for example, I can actually click on the search option here. Under this little drop-down arrow at the side, I can also choose whether or not I want to search the selected bin or all bins. So in this case, I actually want to search the whole project. So I'm going to select all bins. And now I need to choose which fields I'm actually trying to match. So you can see here the filter by is actually based on the file name of the clip, which is absolutely fine if you know the file name that you're searching for. In this case, though, I actually want to match to the scene information. So if I just tap S on my keyboard and keep tapping S, it will cycle through all the metadata fields until I get to the scene. Selecting that, I can now type in SFO. And you can see that all of the clips in the project that have actually got that scene information, SFO, will now be revealed. Let's say I want to find a clip that actually has the comment for Kenya. From the filter by, I can choose the comments field just by tapping C many times until comments appears. And now highlight the text for the search and again type in what I'm actually looking for. That's the power of metadata in order to be able to search right the way across your project to find the clips that you're looking for. But we can go one step further. If you clear the search field and close down the search field by clicking the search button, now go to your DaVinci Resolve Preferences menu, choose User, Editing. You can see that there's a category of preferences for automatic smart bins. By default, the automatic smart bins for keywords is already on. However, you can also see that we can create automatic smart bins for anything with shot or scene metadata. Click the automatic smart bins for the scene metadata and click Save. And now in your list of smart bins, you've now got a new scene category. Use the disclosure arrow to open that up and you can now see that the information for each scene is displayed as its own smart bin. Just simply select the smart bin in order to be able to access the contents. But you're not simply limited to the default automatic smart bins that you can have within DaVinci Resolve. You can actually create your own custom smart bin. In this case, I'm going to go back to the File menu and choose the option New Smart Bin. This field then opens up and it's asking me for a variety of rules that I can actually input in order to be able to narrow down the footage that I actually want to locate. Let's rename this smart bin B-roll. So now I need to choose my first rule. So in this case, I'm going to say Media Pool Properties, but I don't want to match on the file name. I actually want to match on the keyword information to begin with. So keywords do not contain interview. So now my smart bin search is automatically filtering out any clip that has the interview keyword. I'm going to add another rule for this. Media Pool Properties for keywords does not contain credits. This was the other keyword that I actually added to my title that I actually don't want to see in the B-roll bin. You can also choose to add a subset of rules to your smart bins as well. Holding down the Option or the Alt key on your system when I click on this plus button actually turns it into an options menu. And now I actually have a subset of rules that I just want to match any to. And in this case, I actually want to specify clip types. So I'm going to choose Media Pool Properties, change the second drop down to clip type just by tapping C on my keyboard. Clip type is video. This means that only video clips, not audio clips or still image files or timelines will find their way into this smart bin. But that's just video. What if I have video with audio? Well, in this case, I'm going to add another rule to this sub rule and specify the clip type is video and audio. Now I can choose to create my smart bin, and the results of that smart bin will be automatically updated. So if I add any additional clips to this project, providing those clips meet the criteria, I'll be able to find them in this smart bin. If you want to edit a smart bin for any reason, just simply double click on the smart bin and the rules of that smart bin will open up, allowing you to change them. There's one other thing that we can actually use the metadata for in Resolve, and that's to actually use the information in the metadata in order to be able to rename the clip within the project. This can be very useful if you actually want to do a search across a clip name, or you just want to simply have a sanity check as to what that actual clip is. By naming the clip in an appropriate way, it's easy to check that. So here in the B-roll Smart bin, I'm just going to select all of those clips just by dragging a lasso across them. Then I'm going to right-click and choose Clip Attributes. Choose the Name panel from Clip Attributes and highlight the default clip name. So in this case, I actually want all of my B-roll clips to start with the initials AOA for Age of Airplanes. So I'm just going to type in AOA underscore in order to separate the next information. Now I want to take information from the metadata, and in order to do this, I need to add what we call a variable. To add the variable, all you need to do is put in the percentage symbol. And now it'll give you an option to choose whichever metadata field that you want to add. In this case, we want to choose the shot metadata field. So I'm just going to type the word shot after the percentage value, and you can see here in the menu I've got the shot option. So I'm going to select that. And that has now added a tag to my clip name based on the shot information for each of these clips. Again, I'm going to use underscore, percentage, and then use comments. Now when I click OK, the clips are now all renamed in the media pool using AOA underscore the shot number underscore the comments field. This is going to make it easier for me to be able to locate each of the clips and actually use them in my edit. I want to do the same with the interview clips. So I'm going to select the interview Smart bin, select the interview clips, right click, Clip Attributes, in the name, highlight the name field, and this time I'm going to type in INT underscore percentage shot underscore percentage comments, and then choose OK. And now you can see that the interview clips have been named with the appropriate soundbite information. Now that I've got all of the clips organized for the project, I'm now going to go to the edit page so that I can actually start editing. Just simply click on the edit page button, and all of the information that you've just organized inside the media pool and the media page is now available to me. And the great thing is that I can keep organizing this footage as I'm working. And the organization process when you're editing never really stops. It just gets refined the more that you do. I'm actually going to start by selecting the master bin in the media pool and creating a new bin, just a regular bin that I'm going to call timelines. In this case, it's often useful to keep your timelines organized in separate bins so that you know where they all are. Make sure you've got the timeline bin selected, and then go to the File menu and choose New Timeline. Let's just change the name of this timeline so it's something a little bit more appropriate for this project. AOA trailer, and we'll just call it version 1. Quite often you'll go through a number of different versions for all of your edits. If you wish to, you can actually override the default project settings for any timeline. Just simply uncheck the Use Project Settings option, and then you can go into the format to change the timeline resolution and the timeline frame rate. However, in this case, because we already changed the frame rate for the project, we know that this is actually the correct setting. So I'm just going to re-enable the project settings and choose Create. Now I have a timeline, I can actually start assembling the material directly in the timeline and start putting together this edit and making some sort of sense of the material that I've got. So let's go to the Interview Smart bin so that we can actually see the interview clips. From the Sort menu in the media pool, just click and make sure that you're organizing these clips by clip name. This will put them in the order that we're roughly interested in. In this case, we actually have int 01, and it's called Shoot the Real World based on the naming convention that we're using for this project. You can see that as I'm scrubbing backwards and forwards, my live media preview is on so that I can actually see the content of that clip. If my audio scrubbing was also turned on, I would also be able to hear the audio scrub as I move my mouse back and forth. To turn the audio scrubbing on and off, you can use Shift S. I'm going to double click this clip, and that will actually open it directly into the source viewer. Now I can use the scrubber bar here in order to be able to return to the beginning of that clip. And I'm just going to play the clip through just so that we can all listen to the interview. You could use the space bar or the L key.
So in this film, making a documentary about how the airplanes changed the world, it was really important to go out and shoot the real world and how the airplane is connecting and making all the things possible that I want to convey in the film.
Well, obviously, I don't want to use all of that interview. But in this case, as a good starting point, I'm actually just going to bring the whole clip into the timeline. Now, there are several ways in which we can do that. For example, I can just pick the clip up from the source viewer and drag it and drop it into the timeline. This is often a manual way of being able to edit, but it's very limiting on what I can actually do when it comes to editing footage together. So in this case, I'm just going to press Command or Control Z just to be able to undo those changes. And this time, instead of dragging and dropping the clip into the timeline, I'm actually going to pick the clip up and drag across to the timeline viewer. And you'll notice on the right-hand side of the timeline viewer, I've actually got all of the editing functions that I can perform inside the edit page. So this is a useful way of being able to remind yourself of the different functions that we have. The default is actually Overwrite Edit. If I now let go of the mouse, the clip is edited instantly to the beginning of the timeline. The timeline viewer has automatically become active. So if I use the up arrow on the keyboard, I can return to the beginning of the timeline. I'm just going to play forward, just like I did in the source viewer, using the L key on my keyboard.
Yeah. So in this film, making a documentary about how the airplanes changed the world, it was really important to go out and shoot the real world.
That's a good place for this soundbite to end. Now you can see in the timeline I've got a good guide with the image of the waveform where he starts and stops speaking. And you can actually use this as a guide when you actually want to position the playhead for the next edit. And in this case, I'm actually going to click the Detail Zoom button just to be able to step into the timeline a little bit clearer, and then use the J and L keys in order to be able to find the exact point within that interview where he's finished that line, real world. And you can see from the waveform, this is very clear where he stops speaking and where he starts again. Now I'm going to return to my full extent zoom function. This allows me to see the whole timeline from beginning to end. And the playhead is now the location that I'm actually going to perform the next edit. So let's find an interview clip. Let's go to Interview 02, double click from the media pool to open it into the source viewer. And now I'm going to return the playhead to the very beginning. And I'm going to play through the interview.
All 7 continents, 18 countries, it was very important that everything was real. If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right, we would either go back to that location, stay at that location longer, or it didn't make the movie. It was really important. Every shot was original and that everything was real. But there's a few things, only.
And again, I don't want to use all the interview. I only want to use a portion of the relevant part of the interview. So in order to be able to see the parts of the soundbite that I actually want to use, I'm actually going to use a feature inside DaVinci Resolve which I find very useful on a day-to-day basis. If you come up to the top of the source viewer and click the Options menu, that's the 3 dots that you see at the top of the viewer, we can actually choose to show the zoomed audio waveform. You can also choose to show a full clip audio waveform. Let's try that first. And that actually shows me a waveform very similar to the waveform that I have for the clip in the timeline. But because it's actually showing me the whole interview, it's actually a little bit difficult to actually focus on where I want to concentrate on. So in this case, I'm going to click back in the Options menu again and choose Show Zoomed Audio Waveform. Now as I scrub through the clip, you can see that it will actually show me a detailed waveform view depending where I am within the clip. I'm going to return the playhead to the beginning of that clip. I'm just going to play it through, and I'm listening for the first line for his soundbite.
All 7 continents, 18 countries. It was very important that everything was real. If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it.
So that's where I want him to start, where he says, if it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. So I'm now just going to press the J key just to be able to back that up to the beginning of that soundbite. And listening to it closely, there's an ah at the beginning that I actually don't want to include within the soundbite. So now I can actually jog through, if I turn on my audio scrubbing, I can jog through one frame at a time. You can use the left and right arrow keys for this, but I actually find it's really useful holding down the K key and tapping the J or the L keys. So at this point, I want to add an in point into my source viewer. There's only one way you really need to know how to do this, and that's by pressing I on your keyboard. So I'm now going to play the interview through to find the end of the soundbite that I'm interested in.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right, we would either go back to that location, stay at that location longer, or it didn't make the movie. It was really important. Every shot was original and that everything was real.
And that's the word real, where I actually want this soundbite to end. So I'm just going to back the playhead up.
If you read in the original and that everything was real.
And again, you heard a little bit of the but at the beginning, so I'm just going to come back just a few frames, find that gap that you can see there in the waveform, and that's where I want to add my out point. And of course, the magic shortcut is O for out. Now that I've got my in and out point set, I might want to just double check that they're in the right position. So I can actually press Shift I to jump directly to an in point, Shift O to jump directly to an out point. If I actually want to preview the soundbite between the in and the out point, I can hold down the Option key and press the / key on my keyboard.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right, we would either go back to that location, stay at that location longer, or it didn't make the movie. It was really important. Every shot was original and that everything was real.
And it's a little bit tight on the output there, so I'm just going to jog forward just a frame and reset the out point by pressing O. However, sometimes you don't want to listen to the whole soundbite from beginning to end. It could actually be quite long. So if you actually want to preview where the out point is, just simply bring your playhead a few seconds to before the out point. And then from the playback menu, you can choose play around to, play to out. And you can see here, keyboard shortcut is Option Command /.
And that everything was real.
So now that I've got the in and the out point set for this soundbite, I'm going to edit it into the timeline using an overwrite edit. Now I can pick the clip up again and drag and drop over the timeline viewer to access the overwrite. I don't need to drag to the actual overlay. However, if I just come down here to the top of the timeline, you'll see that there are 3 editing function buttons. These buttons are probably the most common used editing features, which is why they've been included at the top of the timeline. You'll see that the middle one of those buttons is actually Overwrite Clip, and my keyboard shortcut for this is F10. Now, if you're on a Mac, you may find that the F10 key doesn't perform an overwrite edit by default, in which case you'll need to go into your system preferences and change the keyboard settings so that it uses all the F1 and F2 keys as standard function keys. If I just press F10, you'll see that the clip is overwritten into the timeline. It's actually overwritten the tail end of the first interview clip. If I use the up arrow key to navigate back to the previous edit point and then preview the edit using the / key.
Shoot the real world. If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it.
The first interview clip now ends at the right point, and the second interview clip starts at the right point, but it's a little bit too tight. We've also got a very nasty visual jump cut between 2 interview clips. So we now want to start to insert some of the B-roll in, just to be able to pace out those interviews. Let's go to the B-roll smart bin. Let's go for this second clip here of this A380 taking off. Let's double click to open it up into the source viewer and then use the J, K and L keys in order to be able to preview this clip. Let's find just as the wheels are about to leave the tarmac. Let's set an in point a second or so before that. And let's set an out point just after the plane has left frame before we get a very horrible sort of camera movement there. So let's set an out point as the tail of the frame has left the shot. Because the playhead is in the right place in the timeline, I don't need to worry about where this shot is going to end up. Make sure that the playhead is on the edit point in the timeline so that you're inserting it in the right place. And in this case, I'm just going to pick the clip up and drag across to my overlays. And this time, to perform an insert edit, I'll just drag it to the insert overlay. And that inserts the clip in the timeline and moves the second interview clip out of the way. This is one of the advantages for using those overlays rather than the drag and drop approach to editing. Using a drag and drop approach, you wouldn't be able to insert the clip as efficiently. So again, one reason for using these functions. In the timeline, let's move the playhead back to the start of that clip. So we're on the first frame of the Lufthansa plane. And in this case, let's go to this clip here. It's called AO1 A380 Taxi. Let's double click that to open it up. Now you'll notice straight away that this clip has audio. It's not great audio, however. So what we need to do here is we need to actually make sure that when we insert this into the timeline that we're not actually going to use the audio. Now there are a couple of ways that we can do this. A simple way would be if we were using drag and drop editing over the timeline viewer. We can actually come here to the source viewer and actually specify using one of these overlays whether we want to edit just picture or just sound. So in this case, I can click on the overlay, drag across to the timeline viewer and choose insert in order to be able to just insert the picture and not the audio for this clip. However, I'm just going to undo that with Command Z, because if I want to use my keyboard shortcuts or my editing buttons at the top of the timeline, unfortunately, I can't specify using that overlay whether I'm using just the picture or just the sound. For example, if I come here and use the insert editing function, you'll see it will actually edit the audio in as well as the picture. Again, I'm just going to undo that. So there's actually another control that we can use in order to be able to specify whether we're editing just picture or just sound directly into the timeline. It's these two buttons that appear with red borders along the left-hand side of the timeline. These are your source controls. I'm actually going to come down to the audio source control here, and I'm just going to simply click once in order to disable that button in the timeline. Now when I perform an insert edit using the timeline button, no audio is brought into the timeline. And this also means I can use my keyboard shortcuts efficiently as well. Another insert edit that we're now going to want to do is actually within this interview clip here. So I'm going to move the playhead to the beginning of that interview clip, and I'm just going to play through the beginning of it for the first soundbite.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. That's where I actually want to insert the next shot.
We wanted to go shoot it.
The shot that I'm actually looking for is in my B-roll smart bin, and it's the clip of AOA 10 Maldives. So double click that to open it into the source viewer. I love this shot. It's this wonderful sort of in and out shot where the camera is half submerged in the water and there is a plane that comes in over the top of the camera. I'm actually just going to set an in point just as the shadow of the plane appears over the coral. And now I actually want to specify around about a 3-second clip. So one way that we can do that is actually to use timecode information to be able to move forwards and backwards through the clip. In this case, I'm just going to hit the plus key on my keyboard and type in 300, which you can actually see in the top timecode field in the source viewer actually translates to 3 seconds. Hit the return key, press O to set the out point in order to set a 3-second clip. Actually, technically, it's 3 seconds and 1 frame, as you can see from the duration field. However, the playhead is inclusive of the frame that you're currently on, so the out point is always set at the tail of that frame. If you need it to be 3 seconds exactly, you just need to come back 1 frame before you set the out point. But now I can do an insert edit by pressing F9. Excellent. So now we've got the edit really starting to come together. However, at this point, you're probably wanting to get a little bit more control of the timeline, particularly when it comes to zooming. Also, you might want to start refining parts of the timeline by removing sections. Zooming in the timeline is actually much simpler in DaVinci Resolve 17 than it's ever been. We've already encountered 2 fixed zoom functions. These are the full extent zoom, which will always show the full length of your timeline, irrespective of how much content is in the timeline. And you've also got the detail zoom button, which allows you to zoom in to a fixed point on the timeline wherever your playhead happens to be. However, you've also got a custom zoom option as well. So this button allows you to set your own zoom level, which you can do by just simply dragging the slider or using the plus and minus buttons to zoom in and out. Or you could use keyboard shortcuts. Command equals allows you to zoom in on your playhead. Command minus allows you to zoom out. If you're on a PC, instead of using command, you just simply use control. And you can also use Shift Z in order to be able to fill the timeline window. This isn't the same as actually using the full extent zoom button, however. The Shift Z function allows you to see the full timeline zoom, but it doesn't remain fixed at the full timeline zoom. So if you add any other clips to the timeline, you'll have to manually change the zoom in order to be able to focus on the parts of the timeline that you actually want to work with. However, Shift Z is very useful if you actually want to return to a previous zoom level in the timeline. Just simply toggling Shift Z is a very useful way of being able to step in and out of the timeline. If you've got a 3-button mouse with a scroll wheel on it, then what you can do is just hold down the Shift key and use the scroll wheel in order to be able to dynamically adjust the height of each of the tracks. And you can also change the bias between the video and the audio part in order to be able to get a larger audio track. And you can actually see how easy it is now to see the waveform for those clips. If you don't have a wheeled 3-button mouse, then you can always use the timeline view options menu here, and then actually use the track height sliders at the bottom of that menu in order to be able to adjust the height of your video and audio tracks. So now that we've looked at how to adjust the timeline zoom level so that you can comfortably view the timeline depending on what you need to do, let's look at how we can remove some of these clips and start to refine the edit a little bit further. To begin with, you might want to actually remove just a simple portion of a clip. For example, you might want to remove the video or audio part of a clip. If I actually concentrate on this middle interview here, I'm just going to move the playhead over that and hit my detail zoom button so that I can focus on this. You should notice on the left-hand side of the clip in both the video and the audio, there are 2 little chain link icons. This indicates that this clip is linked in both its video and audio portions. Using linked clips is very, very useful because it means that you can move them around very easily. When you select the video portion of a linked clip, the audio portion is also selected automatically. So it means it's very hard to move these things out of sync. However, in this case, I just want to remove the video portion of this clip. To override the link temporarily on the timeline, just simply hold down the Option or Alt key on your keyboard and then click on the video clip in order to be able to select it. Alternatively, you can actually turn off the linking for the whole timeline by just coming up and choosing your link selection button here. And with that turned off, if you hold down the Option key and select a clip, it will actually select any linked parts of the clip automatically. So basically the Option or Alt key just simply reverses whatever your link selection is set to for your timeline. With the video clip selected, I'm just going to go back to my full extent zoom so you can see what happens to the timeline. And I now want to ripple delete the clip. So in this case, I'm going to hold down Shift and use the delete key in order to be able to remove that clip. And you'll see it removed the video clip, but it didn't remove the audio portion of the clip. More importantly, it's also closed the gap and rippled the timeline in order to make the timeline slightly shorter. And the full extent zoom is actually still showing me the full length of that timeline. However, something else that you may need to do is actually be able to remove a portion of a clip from within the clip. And a good example of this is if you're working with interview clips. Let's move the playhead to the start of the last interview clip in the timeline and then use the detail zoom button in order to be able to zoom in. There's a line in this clip that I actually want to remove, so I'm just going to preview the clip just by playing it.
If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right, we would either go back to that location, stay at that location longer, or it didn't make the movie. It was really...
So he says, we either go back to that location, stay at that location longer, or it didn't make the movie. It's a little bit repetitious, it's not quite, but the director actually wants to take the second line out there, stay at that location longer. So let's look at how we can do that. First of all, we can actually see the waveform where the portion of the dialogue is that we actually want to take out. Again, using the shift key and the scroll mouse, I can actually make that even bigger. I'm going to move the playhead back, and my audio scrubbing is going to come into handy here. So I'm just going to play forward.
Stay at that location. That location, stay.
And I can hear the beginning of the word stay. Making sure that my playhead is on that point, you can see from the waveform in the timeline that I look as though I'm at the correct location. And now what I want to do is I want to cut this section out. So I'm actually going to use the blade edit mode for the timeline. Coming here to these first 4 buttons at the top of the timeline, these are my different timeline editing modes. The first of these is the default selection mode. This allows me to click on clips, move them around, and delete clips. I've also got my blade edit mode, featuring a very frightening looking razor blade icon, I have to say. If I select that or use the keyboard shortcut B, I can then bring that blade down into the timeline here. Making sure that my snapping is on, you can see how easily that line will actually snap to where my playhead is. And I'm just going to click once in order to be able to add an edit. That's the beginning part of the clip that I actually want to lose from the timeline. I now need to find the end.
Stay at that location longer, or it didn't make or acknowledge longer, or...
And I'm looking for the word or. About there. It's taken a little bit of sort of jogging back and forward 1 frame at a time, just in order to be able to hear that. But I was actually trying to find the beginning of the word or. Again, I just want to take my blade and just come near the playhead and click once more in order to be able to add a second edit point. This has now isolated the portion of the clip that I actually want to remove from the timeline. However, I don't want to use the blade mode again, so I'm going to switch back to the selection mode just by pressing A on the keyboard. I can now select that clip and then press Shift Backspace or Shift Delete in order to be able to remove the clip from the timeline. That's got rid of the portion of the clip that I isolated, but I now need to hear how that edit is working. So if I press the / key,
right, we would either go back to that location, or it didn't make the movie. It was really important.
It's probably not the tidiest of edits, but don't worry. Only the very skilled and experienced editors will be able to get that right first off. More often than not, when you're editing something, you just need to make your best guess and then refine it later. So we'll leave this for the moment, but we'll come back to it in a few minutes. In the meantime, I'm actually just going to go back into my full extent zoom so that I can see the whole timeline. And now what I want to do is remove this portion of the first interview clip. You remember that we overwrote the tail end of that clip. However, the beginning part of the clip is still in the timeline, so I want to remove that. Now, if I use my selection edit mode here, I can select the beginning part of that interview. And if I trim that, you can see that it will actually trim and remove a portion of the clip, but it will also leave a gap. This is not a huge problem, but there's more efficient ways that we've got being able to trim that and not leave a gap. So I'm just going to undo that in order to put the clip back to how I originally had it. And again, I'm going to change my timeline editing mode. I'm going to change it from the selection mode to my trim edit mode. And trim edit mode is a really powerful way of being able to manipulate the clips in the timeline in DaVinci Resolve. You don't need to keep going in and selecting specific tools. This one mode will actually do all of the trimming functions that I need on a day-to-day basis. Using T allows me to select the trim edit mode. And now when I go back into the timeline, I can click the same edit point and start to trim just by dragging the mouse to the right. Yeah. As I do so, you can see that the rest of the timeline is actually changing. I'm actually rippling the rest of the timeline back, thereby shortening it by the amount that I'm actually trimming off the beginning of that clip. You can also see I can go the other way as well. I can actually add footage back to that clip if I need to. If I keep going, and you can hear from the audio scrubbing where the actual interview starts. So I can now let go of the mouse, and you can actually see the tooltip there actually says that I'm removing at 3 seconds and 4 frames from the beginning of this clip. Now if I return the playhead to the beginning of the timeline, I can play from the beginning.
In this film, making a documentary about how the airplanes changed the world.
And I've actually got a much sharper start to the interview. And I can also use the trim edit mode in order to be able to fix the problem with the edit in the interview that I was just doing earlier. Move the playhead to the edit point and then use the detail zoom button to zoom in. Sometimes I only want to be able to trim a frame or two in either direction. So being able to zoom in means that I'm much closer to the footage and therefore have a little bit more control over it. In this case, I'm actually just going to select the outgoing part of this clip here where the waveform is that shows me that probably I'm just catching the outgoing word there. And now I can actually click and drag in order to be able to remove 1 or 2 frames at a time. If you haven't actually got the level of control that you're interested in, you may want to turn off your snapping here at the top of the timeline. Keyboard shortcut N is always worth remembering because you can always do this at any time, even if you're in the middle of an operation. So in this case, I'm going to click and I'm going to tap N on my keyboard, and now I can actually remove a single frame from that clip. But you can also do this using keyboard shortcuts as well. For example, if I use the period key, I can actually add a frame to that clip, and if I use the comma key, I can remove a frame from that clip. So now if I press the / key,
right, we would either go back to that location or it didn't make the movie. It was really important.
And again, it feels a little tight still. I think the outgoing portion of that is fine, but let's now select the incoming portion and let's just trim it back 1 frame. So I've now added a frame using the comma key in order to make that timeline 1 frame longer because I'm always rippling the footage.
Right, we would either go back to that location or it didn't make the movie. It was really important.
And that sounded pretty good to me, but you might just want to sort of explore this a little bit more. What would happen if we added another frame to the incoming shot using the comma key?
Right, we would either go back to that location or it didn't make the movie. It was really important.
And again, it's probably about the same. So I'm just going to take that frame off again and probably leave it at that point. So now I'm happy with how that edit is working. I'm actually just going to start adding a few more clips to the timeline just so we can pace out the edit and see where we're going with things. So in the timeline, I'm going to deselect the edit point and go back into my full extent zoom and just use the shift key and the scroll wheel on my mouse just to adjust the track height. So I've got a little bit more space for the audio. And I'm going to return the playhead to the beginning. You can either simply drag it or use the home key to go back to the top of the timeline. So at this point, I'm just going to add some music to this timeline. Well, we already created a music bin earlier, so we know exactly where to find that piece of music. In the bin list, select the music bin, and then I'm just going to turn off my audio scrubbing by pressing Shift S, and then I'm going to double click to open the music into the source viewer. Now, when you open audio in the source viewer, you actually get an upper waveform, which actually represents the whole of the audio clip, and a lower waveform, which actually represents a zoomed in portion of the clip. So it's like having the two waveform displays side by side, which is very useful to work with. In this case, we actually want to take the whole of the clip, so we don't need to set any in or out points to this clip. And in this case, I'm just going to pick the clip up, drag it across to my timeline viewer, and choose the Place on Top function. This then simply creates a new audio track at the bottom of the timeline and places the clip in it. It may seem counterintuitive that I've actually used something called Place on Top to actually place the audio at the lower part of the timeline, but it just is the way that that edit works with audio, which typically lives below the video in a timeline. The audio is actually quite loud, this piece of music is, so I'm actually going to move my mouse over the clip and actually find the point where I can actually locate the volume curve on the timeline. If I now click at that point, I can grab hold of the volume curve and lower it to an appropriate audio level. I'm actually just going to take it all the way down to around about -12 dB in the timeline here. Doesn't necessarily mean to say that that's the right level. However, it's a useful starting point, and I always need to refine the levels later anyways. Now that I've got the audio at a reasonable level, I should be able to hear the interview over the top of the music.
In this film, making a documentary about how the airplanes changed the world, it was really important to go out and shoot the real world.
That's fine at the moment. It gives me something to work with. It might be that the music gets changed at some point in the future, or I might need to refine it a little bit more. So I don't want to spend too long adjusting the levels and making them perfect. Not at this stage. Now that I've got the music into place, that actually gives me a time for the edit. So I've now got something to aim for in terms of an overall duration. Let's move the playhead to the edit point between the two interview clips halfway through this piece of music. We're going to start by editing a new clip in here, and it's actually just going to help us to fix that very nasty jump cut. Let's go to the B-roll bin, and let's find the clip called South Pole. Double click that, it's AOA 8, shot 8, and I'm going to set an in point just as the tail of the plane is coming out from behind that yellow sign. So an in point there. And I'm wanting to take 5 seconds. I don't know if 5 seconds is the right duration, but it's just a good all-round number that we can tend to work with for putting shots in. So I'm going to use +500 in order to jump the playhead forward by 5 seconds. Hit return, set an out point. And now I can just make a simple overwrite edit with F10. If I back the playhead up in the timeline and then hit the / key,
Right, we would either go back to that location or it didn't make the movie. It was really important.
and I think that edit works nicely. The audio of the interview is working very well, and the new picture that's overwritten the end of that interview actually covers the jump cut. So now let's add a few extra clips to the end of this timeline, and then we can actually trim those clips to the correct duration. From the B-roll bin, select the Kenya clip, AOA 07, hold down the Command or Control key and select AOA 11. That's the St. Martin landing. And then again, hold down Command or Control in order to select AOA 14, Aerial Alaska. With those 3 clips selected, I can actually drag those clips directly to the timeline viewer and choose the Append at End edit. What the Append at End is really useful for is throwing clips at the end of your edit so you can use them to quickly assemble footage into the timeline. And it doesn't depend on where your playhead is. It just depends on where the last clip is in your timeline. Obviously, those clips are way too long for this edit, so I just need to reduce their duration. To select the clips, I'm going to switch into my selection edit mode, select the clips, now go back to my trim edit mode, right-click any of those clips, choose Change Clip Duration, Command or Control D is the shortcut, and from the Change Clip Duration box, I'm going to choose the 5-second preset. As I said, 5 seconds is not necessarily the correct duration, it's just a duration that's worth starting at. Click Change, and now my clips have been trimmed on the timeline. However, I've still got a little bit of work to do here. Let's move back to the beginning of the South Pole clip, and then let's use the Detail Zoom button just to zoom in a little bit here. I want to make the South Pole clip a little bit shorter because nothing really happens in it. So a 5-second shot is a good starting point, but let's just make it a little bit shorter from the beginning. So if I select the incoming part of that clip, just to select that clip there, you'll notice I haven't selected any audio, and I'm using the trim edit mode here in order to be able to select the beginning part of that clip, and I'm just going to remove a few frames just to bring it down to about 4 seconds duration. You can see that as I'm trimming it, the tooltip is telling me how much I'm actually trimming it by, and the grey numbers underneath represent an overall duration. However, look at what's happening to the underlying audio clip of the interview. Remember, I had the interview working in terms of the audio. By changing it like this, I'm actually losing parts of the outgoing audio clip. I don't want to do that. So in this case, I need to undo that change. Now, the reason that this is happening is because Resolve fights to keep everything in sync after the point at which you are trimming. So if a clip starts at the trim point or afterwards, then it will move in an appropriate direction. In this case, we actually need to break that functionality that up until now has actually served us quite well. So in this case, I'm actually going to come to the track header and I'm going to choose to lock the track. That will prevent any additional changes being made to any of the clips on this track. I'll now trim that clip to the 4-second duration that I was aiming for. And you can see that the audio underneath is now no longer moving. Let's go back to full extent zoom and then play to review the change.
Go back to that location where it didn't make the movie. It was really important. Every shot was original and that everything was real.
That's a nice shot of the Kenya plane. However, you'll notice the beginning part of that clip was just a little bit untidy. So again, I'm just going to ripple a few frames out of the beginning of that clip. If we move the playhead to the beginning of the clip, go into the detail zoom, use the trim edit mode in order to be able to ripple a few frames out to get rid of the yellow part of the plane at the top of the frame there. Again, bringing the duration down to that around about 4 seconds. It's not important to get it accurate at this point. It just means that just refining the beginning of the shot. Let's continue playing.
Original and that everything was real.
Now, there's a few things that we need to do here. First of all, we still need to be able to bring the duration of those clips down, but they're actually in the wrong order. I want the Alaska shot to follow the South Pole shot on the timeline. Then I would actually like to finish with the St. Martin shot. Now, if I use my selection edit mode to be able to move a clip around the timeline, all I'll simply do is overwrite what is currently there. So I need to use a different function for this. And this is what we would call a shuffle insert edit. And it's a little bit of a secret function that you now know about. To perform a shuffle edit, hold down the Shift and Command or Control keys, and then use the comma and period key in order to be able to move the clip backwards and forwards through the timeline. So I can now put the aerial Alaska shot after the South Pole shot. If I hold down the Command key and use the left and right arrow keys, this will allow me to select another clip. Hold down Shift and Command and use the comma and period keys allows me to reorder those clips as well. And you can actually select multiple clips on the timeline and use the same keyboard shortcuts in order to be able to shuffle those groups of clips around the timeline. So this makes it really easy to move one scene from one part of the timeline to another. So now I've got the shots in the right order, I'm just going to trim the aerial Alaska shot before adding the credits to the end. Let's go into Detail Zoom, make sure I'm in my Trim Edit mode by pressing T, and I'm just going to trim the end of that shot, again, to the magic 4-second duration. I'm going to go back into my full extent zoom, and I'm just going to play the timeline just so that I hear the last beat of the music. I'll use my audio scrubbing. Just to be able to find the beat of that music. So using the audio beats for the music is a good way of being able to guide the edit. Now we need the credits, so let's go to our credits smart bin. Let's double click to select the credits in the source viewer. And in this case, we actually want to take all of the credits. So we're not going to set any in or out points. Instead, we're just going to perform an overwrite edit with F10. If I use the up arrow key in the timeline, use the / key. Now that I've got those shots in at the end of the timeline, I just need to go back through and refine which parts of the shots that I'm using. So I need to use the trim edit function for that as well. Let's position the playhead over the St. Martin shot at the end of this timeline and use the detail zoom button to zoom in. If we preview the shot by selecting it and pressing the / key, you can see that we're actually using the beginning part of the shot where actually the plane is quite far away. So instead of that, if we use the trim edit mode and actually click on the upper part of the clip on the timeline, this will enable us to slip the actual content of the shot. You can see how the clip is slipping on the timeline and how the thumbnails are being updated. If I keep on dragging, if you look at the timeline viewer, you can see in the upper right corner, you can see the outgoing frame as the plane disappears overhead and out of shot. And that is where I want that shot to end. This is called a slip edit. The slip edit is one of the most powerful trimming functions that we have in the timeline. I'm going to return to my full extent zoom and just position my playhead over this Alaska shot. Again, I'll select that and just press the / key just to preview it.
Every shot was original and that everything was real.
It's a nice shot, but it's lacking a certain amount of dynamism. So another thing that we can often do with shots is we can adjust the speed of them. With that clip selected, I'll just come up here to the top right-hand corner and open up the inspector. Scrolling through the inspector, I actually have a category called speed change. If I just simply click on that to open it up, I can now specify the speed of this clip. Speeding the clip up should give us something more to actually see, as it looks as though probably the plane is actually going to be flying a little bit faster. Selecting the speed percentage, type in 200 and hit the return key. That then adjusts the speed of the clip, so it's now playing at 200% or twice as fast. If I hit the / key,
every shot was original and that everything was real.
there's now a little bit more movement in that shot. So in this case, I can now slip the clip in order to use a later part of the shot as the camera pans around the plane, so that we now get this shot in the top right quadrant of that timeline view. As you can see, the end frame is now the plane with the mountains in the background.
Every shot was original and that everything was real.
Another way of using a different part of the same shot is actually to use a match frame and replace function. In this case, if I move the playhead to the first frame of the Kenya clip, if I actually want to reveal the original source clip for that clip, I can just press F on the keyboard in order to be able to do a match frame. This actually brings the original source clip up into the source viewer. This means I can now see all of the rest of the clip without actually having to manipulate it directly on the timeline. If I now choose a new starting frame for this clip, just as the plane is coming over this shot of the flamingos here, I've now got the playhead in the correct position. And now I can use the replace edit function in order to be able to match the two playheads together. You can use the replace edit by simply dragging the clip over the timeline viewer to the replace edit overlay, or alternatively, you've actually got a replace clip button at the top of your timeline, or you can use your keyboard shortcut of F11. And in this case, the replace edit has actually replaced the clip by matching the two playheads together. So the playhead here in the source viewer is actually placed at the location of the playhead in the timeline, and then the clip is actually replaced based on the source media clip after the playhead. It's a very, very powerful function if you actually want to be able to synchronize clips together. It's useful for being able to edit sound effects into the timeline, or to be able to match two images together with different actions. For example, here, if we go to the last clip here in the timeline, where we actually have the St. Martin landing plane flying overhead, sometimes, instead of match framing to the same clip, you actually maybe want to reveal the clip in its original source bin. This is because usually additional takes of the similar sorts of footage would be available usually in that bin. So in this case, instead of match framing to the source clip, right click the clip in the timeline, and there you can use the Find in Media Pool option. That will then reveal the clip directly in the media pool in the bin, and usually other clips around that will be alternative takes. For example, this clip, AOA 12, actually has the similar plane landing, but also has lots of people in the foreground. This is a much more dramatic shot than the original one that we were using. If I double click that clip to open it into the source viewer, and then actually use my JK and L keys in order to be able to find a frame which is sort of visually matching the frame that I'm viewing in the timeline viewer, with the two playheads in the correct positions, I can now simply do a replace edit and match the action across the two shots. So these are just some of the trimming and some of the editing functions that we have within Resolve in terms of being able to put an edit together. Just before we actually move to the next stage of the editing process, I'm just going to make a slight change to some of the audio for the interview. And in order to do this, of course, I just need to unlock the entire track. And in this case, I just want to find a beginning of his interview here, just at the very end of the interview.
Or it didn't make the movie.
Didn't make the movie. And I actually want to separate this part of the clip here and just move it a little bit further up and out of the way. So I could use my blade edit mode here to cut that clip, or I could use a short keyboard shortcut for this. If I select the clip and press Command or Control B, that will actually split the clip, and now I can move that clip and position it where I need it to be. About there will do.
It's really important. Every shot was original and everything was real.
So hopefully this video has been useful in showing you some of the editing functionality that we have within DaVinci Resolve. Don't forget, if you've got any further questions, then please feel free to join us on the forum pages where questions are answered on a daily basis. We've also got a full range of training materials available for free as well, so check out the DaVinci Resolve training pages where you can download further videos and books to help you get to grips with Resolve. Thank you very much.